Shalom and welcome to the Heartland Connection. This is Zach Waller, the Executive Director of Yovel, your host, coming to you guys straight from the Heartland of Israel. The pruning is wrapping up. We had an amazing group of guys come in for this year for the pruning, and we wrapped up with about 75 acres of vines pruned. So that's just huge, just so amazing to actually be able to be part of this restoration that's happening and to see these vineyards that are just flourishing in the mountains of Samaria. 30 years ago, there were no vineyards in the mountains of Samaria. And, just last year, just our group alone harvested like over 400 tons of grapes, just pruned 75 acres. I mean, this is just phenomenal. Such an amazing thing to be here and to be able to so literally connect to the prophetic restoration of the land of Israel. By the time you guys will be listening to this podcast, you'll have celebrated Purim. I'm actually recording this earlier in the week, so we haven't celebrated yet, but hope you guys have had a wonderful Purim. And I wanted to share one thing that I've been kind of thinking about a little bit and actually heard for those that you've been here. Batia Selah, one of our friends from Itamar, who's actually in the I Am Israel film, and one of our favorite tour guides in Israel. She was talking about the Purim festival and about the book of Esther and how we look at Esther as one of the greatest biblical heroes, but she was saying, if you really look into the story, one really powerful thing is that Esther really just did one really huge heroic thing in saving her people, right? But she had to live in the palace with this pagan king, and from what I understand, historically, this king was not a very moral person, was not, in any way, righteous. And so Esther, this was a huge, huge sacrifice for her to have to live in this palace, in this pagan place, so that she could fulfill her life destiny of saving her entire people. So that was just a really powerful thing to me, and just thinking about that, like, wow, we never know what God is, how he wants to use us, and what he, the situation he might put us in order for us to fulfill the calling he has for us, and just recognizing the huge sacrifice that Esther made in order for her to fulfill her destiny was just really, really amazing. Sometimes we get tired of the little things, for whatever reason. But so I just was very encouraged by that thought that, wow, Esther hung in there to do and to live in a, not so perfect, a very hard place, because she knew that God had called her there. We have the famous quote, "For such a time as this," in order to save her people. So I hope you guys are also encouraged by that. And like I said, you never know what God's preparing us for. I know for us, for our family, that's really our testimony of just trusting in God. When we were on Russell Creek, we had no idea that God was preparing us there to go to Israel. And I'm not in any way comparing, our time in Russell Creek to Esther having to be in the palace of a pagan king by any means, but I'm just saying that, we had no idea that God was preparing us to come to the land of Israel. What that next step was, or why he had us there necessarily, and that he had us there in order to come and if you had told us there in Russell Creek that we'd be in Israel hosting hundreds, thousands of volunteers in the lands of Israel, we would have been like, you must have the wrong person. But we see, what God's done, because, and I guess that's what I'm saying in relating this, is like our step of obedience, following God's will, is what led us to being able to do what we're doing for him now in the land of Israel. And Esther being obedient to go into the palace is what led her to being able to save her entire people. And I think that's a huge lesson, and that's something that, many people have come and asked us, well, hey, we want to do what you guys did. We want to go to live off the land. And we're like, well, you really need to pray about this and make sure this is God's will for you, because really, it's not necessarily God's will for everybody to do the same thing. It's not a cookie cutter thing that's like, okay, yeah, do this 1, 2, 3, and then you're following God's will. You have to pray and seek God, and when God asks you to do something, then when you follow that direction, that's when you are blessed, and that's when you can fulfill your destiny that God has for you. And it's probably not going to Russell Creek and living off the land. It's probably something totally different. So that's what I would encourage you listeners, anybody that's listening to this now, is just, ask God, what is your will? Be zealous for him, seek him. And God, the word promises, if we seek him, we will find him. And that's something I've been thinking about a little bit lately too, is just, thinking about how, we hear lots of teachings, we give lots of teachings about different elements of how to walk out our walk of faith in this world. And, we might talk about how to have a godly marriage, how to have how to raise children in a godly way, how to be pure in this generation, how to, these huge things that we're called to do. And it really just struck me recently as I was like, you know what? We can have all these teachings, but if we're not 100%, zealous and following after God with all of our heart, then we're never going to be able to do these other things, kind of like, going off the letter of the law instead of just, really focusing in on our faith and believing in God. And then once we seek after him, once we have time in his presence, when we're focusing on prayer and worship and these type of things, then we're able to walk out our faith in a righteous way when we have that relationship established. And so I was just encouraged in myself to just take another step, like, okay, yes, I need to dig into the word, get to know God more, seek him and find him. And then, I'll be able to have a better marriage and raise better, be a better dad, a better Abba, these different things. So I want to encourage you guys with that. So now getting into the Torah portion, we're in Parashat Ki Tisa, which means when you elevate, which is kind of interesting because you just read in the beginning of the English there, and it's like, when you take up a census, and in Hebrew it doesn't really quite sound the same way. It's like when you elevate the leaders or the heads of the community, then you'll do it in this certain way, and so it's a little bit different idea than just when you take a census. But there was one thing that I was reading in one of the commentaries that I thought was really powerful, and something that also I've been thinking about quite a bit lately, and that's this idea taken from this portion that talks about the census and how each person had to give a half a shekel. And they say one of the ideas behind this thing of giving half a shekel is that we're acknowledging that in and of ourselves, we're not the full picture. We can't accomplish redemption in this world by ourselves. We need other people. So we're just bringing a half a shekel, knowing that somebody else is going to have another half, and that we'll become whole. And basically the idea is we need each other, right? And so just recently I was talking to one of the guys that came here for the pruning, and pruning, just amazing time to get together with guys and talk about different things and pursuing our relationship with God and working with each other. And our conversation went to leadership, and this idea came out in the conversation about competition versus completion. And I was just really encouraged by this because it's something that I've been feeling, as a leader here with Hayuvel, and trying to lead the organization in a good way. This really spoke to me, and basically the idea is that most organizations, most companies majorly function off of the idea of competition, right? Where you have, you're striving to be the best company, and you're competing against a bunch of other companies who maybe have a similar product. And so you have to be the best, and you have to advertise, and you have to compete with these other people. And that kind of mindset kind of filters down into the company itself, where you have, different employees who are competing to get a higher, position or a raise, higher salary. And there's this competition going back and forth. And the one person is really working to get this certain position, but then somebody else takes it because he achieved more than the other one did, or for whatever reason. And then, but then that guy still has to work under the other person. And really in that type of relationship and that type of work environment, there's really no motivation to give to the other person, because then the other person, if you give and help the other person, then they might get to become better than you, right? And might receive that position that you wanted, and so it really isolates individuals, and creates this sort of selfish, sort of individual mindset that's like, oh, I have to be out for myself, and I'm for sure not going to allow anybody else to look better than me. And so then that translates into, oh, I got to put down these other people, so I make sarcastic remarks or try to make them look bad so that I'm the one who's elevated, I'm the one who's brought to a better position within the company or whatever. So I'll be the one to get the raise. I'll be the one to get the better job. And you see what I'm talking about. Like in today's world, in many different ways, this type of idea happens where it's this competition or trying to be better than the other person, trying to raise up our own self-esteem, our own confidence, and to make ourselves look better than the other person. A lot of times that's done by putting down the other person. So then the opposite of that, we're doing competition versus completion. The completion idea is that we need each other, that we're working in a company because I'm good at, this part and the other person's good at the other part. So we have somebody that's doing the finances, they're really good with spreadsheets, crunching numbers, doing all that kind of thing. And that's a totally different personality than the guy who's the director of operations, who's the, get your hands dirty, get out there and get the project knocked out, or, able to work with people really well and get people motivated. We have two totally different people, but how are they going to be able to function and have a thriving company, a thriving thing going forward if they can't work together, right? And so if they acknowledge, hey, both of them acknowledge, I need the other person, then they're able to work together and actually accomplish the things that they want to accomplish, the things that they need to accomplish. And so I thought, wow, this is so powerful. This is, if the American Western mindset could just really grab a hold of this, it would just totally revolutionize the country. If people could get away from this competition and realize that there's different personality. God created different personalities, different giftings within people for a reason, right? And God doesn't make anybody that's useless, right? God doesn't make anybody that doesn't have a particular, I like to say, sweet spot, right? A particular thing that they do really well. And that's been one of my, the thing that I've strived for so much within Hayuvel as the executive director is to be like, okay, anybody that comes into work for Hayuvel, I want to find their sweet spot, the place where I can just undergird them and launch them forward to be able to do what they do best all day, every day, every week, every day of the year, whatever, and just put where they're happy, where they're feeling like they're accomplishing their purpose. And it's been such a privilege to see these different people within the organization just take off and be able to do what they do really well. And I can see that so clearly. There's some people who are a lot different than I am. And, if I try to put my mindset on them, if I try to put the way that I think on them, it doesn't work. A really great example of this is my brother Caleb. All right. Me and my brother Caleb are like total opposite. Caleb is a very relational person. He loves to sit down and talk to people, and he loves to get reaction from people. So he'll, say outlandish things or do outlandish things. He'll grow his beard out and then just shave it off, and just to get that reaction from somebody, he'll say things that are, are fun and exciting, and he'll go do exciting things with people to get, and he loves interacting with people, and if somebody's upset at him, it just drives him nuts. He can't stand it. He has to go and make it right with that person. Super, super, super relational. So me, on the other hand, I'm more analytical. I'm more, think things through, do things, slowly and methodically, and do it right, and make sure that you've got everything in order, and, accomplish what you need to accomplish at the exact right time to make sure you're doing it well. And, I'm very idealistic. I'm reading the scriptures, and I'm studying out these little, things and understanding more and more, and able to share that with other people. And, doing this podcast right now, I'm sharing these things that I've studied out and have learned, and I just get a lot out of that. And I love the details. I love problem solving. I love taking a really huge problem and just trying to figure out how we can make this work. And so the way, what motivates me to do something or why I would do a certain action would be a totally different reason than the way Caleb would do something, or have motivation to do something. So sometimes I found that when Caleb does something, I immediately throw my motivation into why he would have done that. So if he did that, he must have done it because of this, and that's wrong. I just immediately jumped to that conclusion, and I soon realized actually he didn't have that motivation in what he did at all. He wasn't trying to be selfish or prideful or whatever bad thing might have popped up in my mind. He actually did it because he wants to make somebody else happy or it's a more relational type of thing. And so, this whole idea of competition versus completion really struck a chord with me because, it's like that with everybody. Nobody's the same. God made each individual person so different. And so I was really, really motivated to continue, searching these things out and trying to figure out, okay, yes, how do we work together? How do we complete each other more? How do we set ourselves up in a way that we're not competing against one another, but we're actually completing each other in the tasks that God has given us to complete, to work on. And I think a lot of these thoughts came from a book this guy was sharing with me from, I think his name is John Maxwell, and it's called The 360 Leader. So if you guys want to check that book out, great book on leadership. Since our conversation, I've downloaded it and I'm getting ready to dive into it. So hopefully I'll be able to even understand the concept even more. But I definitely encourage you. John Maxwell has a lot of really awesome books about leadership that I've learned a lot from. I encourage you to dig into those. One really big thing that I think we run into in this whole idea of competition is not using proper speech, right? We're trying to put the other person down, like I was saying. And this is something I really learned a lot about from the Jewish people. Is the importance of words. And we even know from the New Testament, James talks a lot about our words. It's like a blazing fire, like the ship's rudder. He going into these different things, it says no man can tame the tongue. And here in Israel, it's a huge deal, something they talk about a lot. And they point out, that the universe itself was created through speech, right? God spoke it and it came into existence. And so, just from the very beginning, speech is a very huge deal. I was reading one article, it was talking about the two mitzvot in the Torah, the two commandments in the Torah that specifically address improper speech. And the one says, thou shalt not go up and down as a talebearer among your people. That's in Leviticus chapter 19. And you shall not wrong one another in Leviticus chapter 25. And the way they interpret that is the main place where you can wrong one another is through evil speech, which they call lashon hara, right? The evil tongue, the evil speech. So they say that tale bearing is essentially any gossip. And it was really interesting to read through kind of there's some different ideas about what they do, what they don't do. They said, I'm just reading through this article, it says it's a violation of this mitzvah to say anything about another person, even if it's true, even if it's not negative, even if it's not secret, even if it hurts no one, even if the person himself would tell the same thing if he was asked. You're not supposed to say anything about the other person, going around telling people, oh, did you hear this, gossiping in that way. So they do really take this seriously. They said that the person who listens to gossip is even worse than the person who tells it, because no harm could be done by gossip if no one was listening to it. It's been said that lashon hara, disparaging speech, evil speech, kills three: the person who speaks it, the person who hears it, and the person about whom it is told. This is like deadly stuff. And then they had a list here of commonly used examples of behavior that is forbidden by this commandment. So they said, 1, you may not call a person by a derogatory name or by any other embarrassing name, even if he is used to it. So no name calling, first off right here. Number 2, you may not ask an uneducated person for an opinion on a scholarly matter that would draw attention to his lack of knowledge or education. How many times do we see that in today's world? Education is such a huge deal. If you can prove that you know this or you know that, or that somebody else doesn't know that and you do, it's like a huge deal in our culture. And they say, no, don't embarrass your friend. He's probably knowledgeable about a different area. Again, completion, not competition. Next, you may not ask a merchant how much he would sell something for if you have no intention of buying it. So again, you're not embarrassing somebody. You're not wasting somebody's time. Next one, you may not refer someone to another person for assistance when you know the other person cannot help. So you can't just, basically give somebody the runaround. So turn somebody off to go, so-and-so can help you, so you can get out of it. You may not deceive a person, even if no harm is done by the deception. And this article says, for example, you may not sell a non-kosher meat to a non-Jew, telling him that it is kosher, even though no harm is done to the non-Jew by this deception. So deception, even if there's no harm, so to speak, is not acceptable. Next one, you may not sell a person damaged goods without identifying the damage, even if the price you give is fair for the goods in their damaged condition. Next one, you may not offer a person a gift or invite a person to dinner if you know that the person will not accept. And that last one, you may not compliment a person if you do not mean it. It's interesting, these different things about speech. All right, so moving on here, we have the Shabbat. It's really interesting. Why is this verse about the Shabbat right here? And it's like really, really powerful verse, like really strong. It's like, and if you go back and look, there's like 7 times in the Bible that it says, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is the Shabbat. And like 20 times it says, keep the Shabbat, keep the Shabbat. So this is a really powerful thing. This is probably one of the most powerful scriptures right here in chapter 31, verse 12. It says, and Hashem said to Moshe, you are to speak to the children of Israel and say, above all, you shall keep my Shabbats. For this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I, Hashem, sanctify you. You shall keep the Shabbat because it is holy for you. Everyone who profanes it shall be put to death. Whoever does any work on it, that soul shall be cut off from among his people. 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th day is a Shabbat of solemn rest, holy to Hashem. Whoever does any work on the Shabbat day shall be put to death. Therefore, the people of Israel shall keep the Shabbat, observing the Shabbat throughout their generations as a covenant forever. It is a sign forever between me and the people of Israel that in 6 days Hashem made the heaven and the earth, and the 7th day he rested and was refreshed. So we see this is like really powerful. Above all, keep it. Next week's portion starts off speaking about the Shabbat, and then it goes right into the building of the tabernacle, and this is where the Jewish people take their definition of work from the work of building the tabernacle. And it's interesting to note this word for work in Hebrew, malacha. It doesn't just mean go out and get sweaty, like that type of work. A lot of people, I've heard a lot of people in the Hebrew roots movement just be like, well, okay, so I'm not going to run too fast. I'm not going to go for a long walk. I'm not going to, I'm just going to lay in bed and rest. But actually the word malacha doesn't just mean exerting yourself. It actually means creating something. And so, I think a lot of Hebrews people, they would never go for a run on Shabbat, but they would, sit down and create something, and that's why the Jewish people don't write, because they're actually creating something. That's why they don't, turn on off light, because they're creating light. This is why they don't, do certain things like that, is because they don't want to create on Shabbat. So it has more to do with creating and not necessarily just working in general. That was interesting. Then we have the story of the golden calf. There's a lot here. A lot of people would say, oh, these crazy Jewish people. It actually looks like they were actually, if you look at this closely, they weren't necessarily, it wasn't straight out idol worship where they were just worshiping the golden calf as God. It looks like, if you look at it closer, they were actually looking for a replacement for Moses, not necessarily for God. So you can study that out more. Incredible rest of this. Looks like we're running out of time, but dig into the rest of this. Have God's presence going with the 13 attributes of God. So much more in this Torah portion. So thank you so much for listening. Shabbat Shalom from the beautiful, exceedingly good land of Israel. Restoration.